Hi, welcome to everyone. My name is Cindy Lopez, and I'm the Director of Community Connections here at CHC. And we're really glad that you've taken some time to join us, and we're excited to um, bring this Ask an Expert session to you on parenting fatigue, something that you probably all know all too well. Before we get started, I just would like to share a little bit about CHC for those of you who may not be as familiar. Um, so, CHC has been part of our local community for about 70 years, and we provide mental health and learning services for children, teens, and young adults. We offer both evaluation and treatment in our clinical services, as well as free 30-minute parent consultations with one of our clinicians. So if you haven't checked out our website before, chconline.org, we encourage you to take a minute to do that. We also have a robust free online resource library with lots of resources, including articles and recordings of previous parent ed sessions that you'll find valuable. We also have our Voices of Compassion podcast series that offers weekly episodes on topics that matter to you as parents. So we hope that you'll take advantage of our services. For this session, the first half is a conversation with our experts, and then we'll take your questions in the second half. So you can submit your questions at any time, starting now, by using the Q&A feature on Zoom. And we're hearing from parents right now that they are overwhelmed and exhausted. And the term burnout really doesn't even begin to describe it. Parents have taken on so much over the past year. As a parent, you're probably feeling drained and overwhelmed and absolutely tired right down to your core. Every day, it seems like something else is happening, right? You're worried about your family's health and safety, shifting demands that you feel, shifting expectations even. And all of this leads to stress and anxiety and depression and a kind of feeling of always waiting for the other shoe to drop. So tonight we're talking about that. And we're privileged to have two of our clinicians joining us this evening to share their experience and insights. Kendra Freka is a licensed clinical social worker who's also a parent. So she has unique perspective to share with you. And Kendra is joined by Anna Ross, one of our postdoctoral psychology fellows here at CHC. And Anna's been working with kids and families in her practice and brings all of that experience to our conversation this evening. So welcome, Kendra and Anna. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. As we get started, thinking about your experience of working with kids and families, we know that everyone's under a lot of stress, especially parents, trying to fill multiple roles and feeling the loss of what life was before, right? And just wondering if you could speak to that a little bit. What are you hearing from parents, and what's their experience as we kind of set the stage for our conversation this evening?
I can get us started with this question. So in terms of what we're observing with parents, I think pandemic burnout has kind of reached a point where we're all kind of languishing in the burnout. Burnout hasn't ended. It looks like things might be reopening soon. And at the same time, all of those concerns that were present at the beginning of the pandemic of taking over all of their responsibilities to be mom or dad, to be potentially teacher, tutor, and providing kind of everything that was provided by all of these different environments before the pandemic. So this is coming up in conversations with parents all of the time. Oftentimes decisions that parents were making about things like screen time, now with all of kind of the other resources removed from kids' lives, feels harder to make decisions about things we were making decisions about pre-pandemic. We felt like we were really in the right. Like, these are the recommended guidelines for screen time, and everything changes when school goes on Zoom, and really the kids' only social outlet with people outside the household can be through screens. So I think it's making everything that parents were used to doing day to day much more difficult. And with the pandemic ongoing, it's this kind of restless feeling of when will it end?
I think I've also had a lot of parents question, am I the only one feeling this way? You know, a lot of shame or criticism of their parenting. Parenting was hard before the pandemic, and now it's like a whole new level of hard. So, really wanting to validate all of you parents who came tonight, because we are all tired and we understand that. And so, really, the fact that you took the time and joined and made us one of your priorities means a lot, because we all know how hard it is for parents and how much you have on your plate. And so, really wanting to validate that, you know, you're going through a lot, and we really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Kendra and Anna. So you talked a little bit about what you're hearing from parents. How is having everybody at home impacting parents? Like, what's happening with parents on that front?
I think before we would talk with parents about really keeping a work-life balance, right? We'd talk about, can you leave your work at home so when you go home you're present for your family? And now we don't have that luxury anymore. Many people are working from home, their kids are doing school from home. And I think at the beginning of the pandemic, it was easier to feel like, okay, we can do this for a while. There was some novelty in it. Oh, I can do some projects around the house and clean up. And as it's gone further and further, and people have felt more and more isolated at times because they can't visit family, or they're having to regularly make some tough decisions about health and safety, about school. Um, I'm seeing the chat comment, a new hobby, driving mom and dad crazy. My daughter said to me, Mom, is your job to annoy me? So I think it works both ways too. But really trying to figure out, how do we, you know, not get fatigued at work, not get fatigued at home. And we have a lot of different roles. You know, I really empathize with the person who talked about having young children under the age of 2 at home. And I think all of you with older kids can relate. It's been a long time since our kids have been that young, but just recognizing how tired we were then and how sleep was so important, and now feeling even more isolated than you might have felt before. So really recognizing how important that balance is. And even though we feel like we don't have enough time to do things, making sure that you're taking care of yourself. I always think of the plain example of, you know, you need to put your mask on before you put the mask on of someone else. So, you know, it's not something a parent always thinks about. We frequently think of our kids first, and yet to be the best parent, we really need to be the best self first.
Totally agree. And I think in that same vein of thinking about kind of that balance and what is attainable and what is not attainable, I think letting go of perfection, that everything is not going to be attainable all at the same time. We're surviving a pandemic, and that is kind of the main goal at this point. And like Kendra's saying, parenthood is a high priority. So thinking about, what are the other things that are kind of weighing on us and pulling us in the different directions? And thinking about what we can prioritize, knowing that we're not going to be able to do everything. And certain things might have more of a valence to you as parents of being important over other things. And sometimes that means that, you know, the dishes aren't going to get done. And these household tasks that are also falling on parents to complete regularly at home, those might not be attainable all at the same time, with the various demands of work at home, everyone living at home all at once and doing school and office work, plus all of the tasks of being at home, and kind of parents running everything. Oftentimes things like housework, which, you know, sometimes make us feel really guilty if we're not doing it, and feel like almost they have a moral valence of, if my house isn't put together, what does that mean for me? Am I not put together? I want to create this environment for my kids, and knowing that, you know, with everyone being at home all of the time, and this home space being a functional environment for all of these different things, some of that is going to fall by the wayside. And it's really about kind of setting attainable goals, what is reasonable, and letting go of that perfection.
Those of you who have kids with learning challenges, we talk frequently about EF skills and goal setting and time management. And again, I think that it looks different in a pandemic, and it helps when we can look at that too, instead of trying to tackle everything, instead of doing, I talk a lot about the time with your children and being present and being mindful of that, but also the quality versus the quantity. And I think that's true with a lot of the things. If you can take things off your plate so that you can do fewer things more efficiently, I think it improves our own self-worth and self-esteem because we're trying to do so much. And I think that's been a huge thing I've heard with parents, is just feeling like their good enough isn't good enough, and really understanding that when we talk about our best self right now, it may not be the best self that we had before the pandemic, but it's good enough.
Yeah, thank you. That does remind me of a couple other podcasts we've done recently too, where some of our clinicians have said similar things, and it's it's strange time right now, right? We used to kind of have home and school separate, and now everything's blurred. Everything's kind of happening under one roof. And add to that, which kind of leads into our next question, add to that now we're thinking about how do we re-enter the world, right? So we've been trying to stay away from people and trying to be safe and all those kinds of things. So now we're more people are getting vaccinated, and we're hearing, okay, well, it's safer to take some steps out into the world. So as we talk about reentry, we know it's not going to look like what it did before. So how can parents kind of help to manage all the emotions that come along with that? Seems like there's like multiple layers of how people are feeling.
Yeah, and I think a lot about the grief and loss that people feel too. In particular with kids. Part of my time I spend at Sandhill School as the counselor there, and as kids were coming back on campus, they would say things like, wait, the playground's not available, or this isn't available. And so a lot of the things that we think of in certain environments or certain places are really different now. Even when you think about going to a public event, now that people are getting excited about being able to go to a baseball game or a basketball game or even live music, but it's not the same. It's not being elbow to elbow with a crowd, or being able to feel like you can cheer without your mask on, without kind of spreading germs or other things. And so one thing I would say is just really being aware that whatever you're feeling right now is okay to feel, and recognizing that everyone's got their own comfort level. It's the same thing that we talked about at the beginning of all of this, when some people felt comfortable sending their kids back to school, some didn't. I think there's a whole different wave that's coming now too of grief, in that a lot of schools want to send, or a lot of parents want to send their kids back, and some schools aren't open. And then it's that scramble of, my kid's been home for a year, and they not only, I know the comment in the chat was, they're driving us crazy and we're driving each other crazy, but it's also just, we know what they're missing because we've been through that. Where for kids, they might not recognize all of the things that they're missing immediately because they're in the middle of it, right? Or they're doing Zoom. And so once they do reintegrate, it's really recognizing that there's going to be that adjustment, there's going to be that anxiety, and that's normal. And really not trying to expect them to be back into it, and really feeling like it's going to be the level of academics, it's going to be the level. There's that transition time that's really important for them, because they do need to feel comfortable and safe and secure again. And the big part of that is really bonding with the teachers as they return, and making sure that parents are feeling like they're safe to go back, all of those things, and that piece of it, or even going to the store, or going back to sports. Those of you who've heard podcasts from me before, webinars before, one of the stories I heard a long time ago, which always resonated with me, was parenting tips for kids with learning disabilities, and helping parents see the analogy that when you're becoming a parent, you're getting everything together, and it's like a trip to Paris. You learn the language, and you study the guidebooks, and you've got all of the maps, and you have all the places you want to see. And then you get off the plane and you're in Holland, and you see windmills and you see flowers, and it's all beautiful, but you don't know the language and you don't know what it looks like. And so I use that example frequently with parenting, when your expectations of what you think it's going to be like aren't what they are. But I think in the pandemic, it's really helpful for all of us to see that way, that there are linings, and there are those chances to improve the moment, and really trying to capture those and be present in those moments. And I know Anna has a lot of resources that she uses in her work with some of our teens with mindfulness and with parents, and that can be a really great tool for a lot of our families.
And I would agree. There's in our resource list, there's a link to some free guided meditations, some mindfulness exercises around that. And from a DBT perspective, mindfulness really helps us access what's called our wise mind, which is referring to this idea that I think parents experience on a day-to-day basis, where it's when we're feeling emotional, when there's an interaction that's hard for us, or we're trying to contain a child's emotional reaction. Oftentimes when emotions are heightened, it's hard to access kind of those problem-solving parts of your brain. That's not kind of what's fired up in the moment. Oftentimes it's like that fight or flight reaction, or that really intense emotion that's kind of driving the car. And so mindfulness can be one of those things that can be really useful in terms of not only what Kendra's saying, but like being present in the moment, but also in giving us that space to get back into that kind of wise mind headspace of being able to kind of problem solve and cope with the situation that's at hand. And I think that this is especially relevant for parents, because you don't get a break. There aren't breaks in parenting. And so you're always kind of operating on what is the problem at hand, how can I deal with these situations in the moment, and to be kind of present in that wise mind all the time. It's not going to happen. That's not realistic. But mindfulness can give us tools to kind of get back in the headspace to cope with what's going on in the moment.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And also a couple things, as listening to Kendra and Anna talk, a couple things, I think Kendra referenced EF. So she was, on the last question, she was talking about executive functioning skills. And then Anna just referenced DBT, so dialectical behavioral therapy. So DBT, actually, maybe Anna, you could say a couple words about that, what that is.
Sure. So dialectical behavioral therapy, it's like, it's a type of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, that you might have heard of before. It's really similar. So it's focused on a couple of different constructs, one of which is a skill that we teach and that can be really useful and applicable to parents, which is validation, that feeling of like, yeah, that emotion makes sense to me in the moment that you're feeling that way. That can be both important for parents to receive and for parents to give, to be able to help kids understand that where their emotions are coming from makes sense, and those emotions make sense to other people. That helps kids kind of figure out when their emotions make sense and move forward from that. When we're feeling invalidated, oftentimes feels like our emotions make no sense. And so DBT can be a really useful therapy for things like anxiety and depression. We have a couple of different skills groups at CHC that focus on DBT. And it also is a really useful therapy in terms of helping kids and adults with the skills that oftentimes come up when we feel emotionally dysregulated or overwhelmed. So there are things specific to emotional regulation. There's things about distress tolerance. So when our emotions really get out of hand, how do we tolerate that feeling of overwhelm? And then some interpersonal effectiveness skills. So that's DBT kind of in a nutshell.
Thank you, Anna. I just, we are going to get to some of the questions that are being posed. One of the questions that just came up is around mental health. So hard for parents to, in this past year, they've seen their kids not only be unhappy, but also possibly develop some definite mental health struggles, right? And so one parent commented in her question is that over the past year, her son, in addition to ADHD, now has been diagnosed with mental health disorder. So So I think as you talk about, as you just referenced DBT, like that, DBT is a good strategy. We have DBT skills group be a resource for you and those parents who are really trying to support their kids who are struggling with mental health issues. I don't know, Kendra and Anna, if you want to say anything else in relation to that.
Yeah, actually, when I saw that comment, something that is very common in DBT kind of came to mind. And the DBT is based on this concept of dialectics, that two things that seem like opposites can be true at the same time. And the underlying dialectic to the therapy is the dialectic of acceptance and change. Oftentimes we need to kind of accept where we're at to be able to change. And I think underlying all of therapy is that dialectic, that push and pull of what can we accept here and what are we motivated to put some progress into change. And I think that comment of feeling like I can't really quite take on that my parenting is good enough because things are getting worse. Because I see that there are these symptoms that are developing. And I think to that, yeah, that's valid. That feeling of not being able to accept that. And I think it's both. It's both kind of accepting that, like, this is the diagnosis and this, yeah, there's a second diagnosis now. And how can we move forward to get accommodations or get treatment? How, if need be, how can I get some help with parenting? If that would be fruitful, if that would be helpful in this treatment plan, how can I kind of get movement towards making my kid's life as wonderful as possible, knowing that now he's contending with two diagnoses and not knowing kind of the full story of that. I think thinking about kind of taking on that that's the truth and that potentially, yeah, there could have been changes made and that you're doing the best you can, which is another assumption of DBT. And you can do more if that would help.
I think one of the things that, as you were talking, Anna, that I recalled as well is that CHC also offers the middle school multifamily DBT group. And I really like that model because, and I used to run it with Anna Parnes, and it really, I feel like so many of the things that we're trying to teach the kids are so beneficial to us at any age. And so when the parents and the kids can learn it at the same time, it creates such an effective model because you can generalize it. You're using the same language. The high school one is great for teens because sometimes they don't want to go to group with their parents. But any of the times you can get the skills or get more information, I feel like it's a great resource for parents and in your personal life. That being said, I think that this is such an unusual time. We have done far more telehealth therapy than we have ever done. And I think that it's challenging because we have some kids that do great on Zoom, and we have other kids that don't want to show their face or have more challenges with engaging. And so for a parent, when they finally do get a resource, and it might not be the best mode for their child, and they can't find that mode, it can be really frustrating. So one of the things that I find is that if you can get into a parent support group, or if you can use some of the resources, and I don't know that we listed, we certainly didn't list all of them, but Parents Helping Parents, understood.org, CHC, there's lots of places that have resources. And I find that some of the best resources within those are the parents, because as you're talking, you'll hear about other networks or other things or treatment modes that are available that might match your child's needs. And it also just makes you feel less alone. So I really enjoy attending those and running those because I just feel like I'm always learning something new from other parents out there.
Yeah, thank you both. And I think Mike just added to the chat a link to our courses. So if you want to find out more about any of those things that Kendra and Anna just referenced, DBT services, the middle school multifamily groups, whatever, that you can find out more there. So thank you, Anna and Kendra. let's toggle back and think about work-life balance, right? That seems crazy. Do we actually ever have that? Is that even possible? And maybe talk a little bit about how screen time plays into that, because we're spending so much time on screens. I get tired of seeing my face all day long. But kids are too. I mean, parents are, kids are, like, it's just a fact of our life. And so that's not going to change, but how, maybe just comment on it a little bit.
Yes, I think in the simplest term, work-life balance, I think, is an ideal that we're striving toward, and might not happen right now. It might not feel like we're kind of hitting that mark all of the time. I think a couple of things that can help are thinking about, like, when we had that separation, when we had transitions from work home, that transition from school to home, thinking about ways to implement transitions into the day if it's possible for both you and your kids. So are there activities or routines that can be consistent after work to transition from work time to family time? Are there similar things that kids can do to transition from Zoom school or from school back to kind of family autonomy? Transitions, I think, can be really helpful. I think also kind of knowing that this may be an unattainable goal right now, and holding that potentially balance is not going to be achieved right now, and thinking about if there are things that are really weighing on you, setting attainable goals for those things. So if you would like to spend more time as a family, potentially not thinking about planning a camping trip right now, and maybe thinking about, okay, is there like time for 30 minutes or 45 minutes a week where we could squeeze in like a family game night? And thinking about kind of small baby step goals to start to shape your life towards more of a balance, I think, can be really helpful. With screen time specifically, I think this is one where in my work with families, it can be really challenging because oftentimes there are generational differences in terms of kids feeling like, I want to be on screens this whole time, and this isn't affecting me at all, and parents knowing that there are kind of these specific set guidelines from the pediatrician about how much screen time to give kids. And in this situation where they don't have access to all of the other sports and extracurriculars and social networks that they had before, it feels like a really hard decision to take that away from kids and say, like, no, you got to turn off the computer. You can't be talking to friends anymore right now. So I think, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think so there's a, in the chat, I just noticed a comment that, oh wait, it was the Q. That, so even if they're working from home, the fact that I'm on there, so as a parent, right? As a parent, the fact on the screen most of the time means nothing to my kids. If, like if they were going into work, their kids would miss them so much. But because parents are around but not available, that's frustrating for the kids. I don't know if you want to comment on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's frustrating both ways. I know my husband works just outside our living room, and when my daughter was doing home learning, she was kitty corner to him. So she'd come over and be like, have you made my lunch yet? And he's in the middle of a work meeting. And so we really talked about, is there a way to have a signal of when you're available and not available? And then I think really defining, if you are doing lunch together or if you're doing something afterwards, that it's not half and half. It's not that you're doing something on the computer and attending to them, but you really are giving them more of that present attention that they're really asking for. And again, more about the quality than the quantity. I do think that being said, that's the ideal. Like, there are times when kids have glitches or things if they're doing school at home and they need help. And so it's kind of shifting gears in the middle and trying to multitask and being flexible and trying to stay calm when we're really frustrated and really tired. We frequently talk about, when we're talking about our mood, our anxiety or depression, that some of the things that we can do to address it are eating well, exercising, getting a good amount of sleep. And I think that these times there's so much going on that it's also really important when we're talking about screen time to think about the quality of the screen time that they're getting. So if you're on screens and have to be on screens for work or school, and then you want to unplug and you're watching a movie or you're doing other things, it can be hours on screen, where sometimes I know for me, my daughter's really active or was really active and had multiple sports she was in. And when that ended, I worried about her physical health because she was not getting the same level. She had more access to food at home than she would at school. And so one of the things we did was we got one of those fit rings that goes with the Switch, and she loves it. And so it's almost like a way of, sneaking in exercise through something that's a preferred item too. We don't do that all the time because I want her to get the fresh air, but I think that, there are some valuable things, virtual tours, all sorts of things that you can do as a family online, especially when we were shelter in place and we couldn't go anywhere. And I think as things open, really kind of pushing yourself to do more things outside slowly so that you can model for your kids those healthy habits, but also to kind of shift the balance from inside and isolation to really getting back out into the community again.
Thank you. So as parents, we've been talking about since last August, as we started to figure out we were going to be in this for longer than we thought, we started talking about self-care for parents, right? And that sounded pretty good when we started talking about it. After a couple of months, parents were like, don't talk to me about self-care. Like, I don't have time for that. I don't have a place for it. So what tips or strategies or helpful thoughts do you have advice for parents about how they might create downtime, and what strategies and tools you might share that parents can use that might help them feel less stressful and more productive? What thoughts do you have about that?
Anna, I feel like you and I are going to probably say similar ones. Mindfulness is such a great tool because you can do it anywhere. And for me, I really tend to lean, or what resonates with me, which may not resonate with everyone, is the senses. And so it's really easy for me to put a lotion that I like in my car or to have it with me. And sometimes those senses can really be grounding, not just for you, but for your kids as well. And so it's kind of that idea of like a candle that might smell like baking, or even the smelling of cooking and things like that. Those things can really help self-soothe us and help us kind of, again, it might not bring our energy level back, but it'll definitely keep us calm. And I think able to feel in those moments like you can recharge and keep going. At least for me, that's one of the things. Music is another one. I feel like when I'm feeling really stressed, if I put on something that's, it can, and again, everybody's different. Some people prefer something that's more relaxing. Other people feel like they want something more upbeat. But I think that those kinds of things are things that you can do anywhere and can be really helpful. Anna, do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, I agree. I think mindfulness is huge. I always put in a plug for mindfulness. I think sometimes we think about mindfulness as something that we do to relax in the moment. And certainly a lot of mindfulness, that's a side effect. And with practicing mindfulness repeatedly, sometimes it just gives us a comfort level to be able to implement it flexibly. So during the workday, taking potentially 2 minutes to work on deep breathing in between meetings, prioritizing that. I think also mindfulness is something that can be integrated with kids. So there are lots of YouTube videos. Like, I think there's one called The Worldling, where it teaches kids how to do things like belly breathing. So if you're finding that you're feeling stressed and burnt out during the day with kids, self-care isn't something that has to happen when kids are all tucked away in bed at the end of the night, that you have an hour to really focus on self-care. It can really be woven throughout the day. And I think that that's a wonderful opportunity to model for kids and talk out loud a little bit about like how, like, maybe, I'm feeling a little stressed right now. I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. I'm going to take a minute. Do you want to take a minute with me and try to just focus on your breathing? I think for smaller kids, sometimes taking belly breaths can be really helpful. And I find belly breaths really helpful as an adult, just taking a very deep diaphragmatic breath. There's a lot of good research on how that's helpful. And kids can get involved in that. You can give them instructions to put one hand on their chest and one hand on their belly and try to breathe in like their belly is a balloon and fill it with air. And then take 2 minutes to just breathe silently. And you can do that really anywhere. And it can also model for kids that sometimes adults feel overwhelmed too. You're going to feel overwhelmed sometimes. And in the moment, you can really take care of that.
Thank you. So let's go to some of the other questions that are coming in. To just toggle back to the working at home kind of thing. One parent just said, that she's at a workplace, or this parent is at a workplace where their colleagues are going to work, but so the parents who have kids at home and distance learning can't go back to work, so they're working from home, and it's kind of like feeling like disappointed on all fronts, right? They're working from home, their kids don't think they're available because they're working all the time, and they're feeling sidelined at work because they're not in the office. So even though they're working all the time, right? So just this feeling like they've disappointed everyone. Like, do you have any helpful thoughts or comments about that?
I just wanted to name that sounds like shame to me. It sounds like there's a lot of kind of guilt and shame going on. And shame is a feeling that we have when we compare ourselves to a standard or feel like we're not meeting expectations. And that kind of gets boiled down to like, I'm bad, I'm doing this wrong. Maybe feeling like people are relying on me and I'm not meeting those expectations. And I think shame is a feeling that so rarely fits the facts. Oftentimes when we feel shame, it feels so true and real to us. And if we saw that shame in a friend or a sister or someone we cared about, we wouldn't kind of have that same judgment of them as being bad or not meeting expectations the same way we do of ourselves. And sometimes just kind of naming that emotion can be helpful and can give us somewhere to go with it.
I think sometimes it's projection too. It's our own thoughts about it. When we start talking with other colleagues, we're in the same situation at the school because some people have childcare, some people don't. For a while, we had some people working remote, and now we're really pushing for everyone to be back. And yet each individual needs are a little bit different, depending on if they have kids or not. And I think that, it's so hard. And I think, when you think back to your pre-kid life, right, and the freedoms that you had, and now thinking in terms of, people who don't have kids, it's still really isolating for them. I talked a lot with other colleagues who didn't have kids, and they're like, I can't see my parents because they're not vaccinated. I'm not going into work right now. Everything's through Zoom. I get exhausted, and, doing the Zoom meetings, I feel like I can't work as long as I used to be able to work. So it's just a different level of problems, in a sense, that aren't insurmountable. And I think one of the things to remember is that there is light at the end of the tunnel. It hopefully won't last forever, right? Some people also are in that adjustment period, which is hard, where maybe it's like, oh no, we are going to work remote from now on, because some agencies have switched to that, and trying to figure out what that looks like and what we need now, that's the new norm.
Yeah, thank you. Anna, there was just a question in the chat. Can you name that mindfulness resource again? It was a website or app?
Yes, it's actually a series of YouTube videos that are relatively new. They're from 2021. It's called The Worldlings, and they're like little Muppets, kind of like trees for mindfulness.
Okay, thank you. So there are a few questions here from parents around socialization. So, for For the young kids, they haven't gotten much socialization. So these are like the, 3-year-olds, they haven't gotten much socialization the last year. And now their oldest son is kind of freaked out around other people. The parents just wondering how to, and if you have any advice about that or how to handle that. She said or this parent said they're worried about them being kind of socially stunted. And we have a follow-up question around socialization and older kids. So
I would just say kids are really resilient. And I think that giving them time, if there are deficits, usually at early ages, those deficits catch up really quickly. And I think, like anything, when there's anxiety involved, or whether it's separation anxiety or social anxiety, you want to make sure that you are slowly moving towards those things that cause that anxiety. And we call it exposure, but you're not kind of dumping them in a pool of kids and saying, okay, go play, if they really haven't developed some of those play skills. And, I think we forget what great models parents are, and that you have been playing, you have been reading. And so the more that you can use the things that you've been doing at home, so if you play with cars, if you play with balls, and then take those and try and slowly add other kids, especially if it's kids their age, that can help. I think it's hard right now finding that, because some people would go to the park in the past and kids would kind of meet up. And now we've been so cautious about stay 6 feet away, wear your mask, that it feels a little bit different. I've been out to a couple of parks and dog parks, and you see more kids out there, but I notice, even more so than my daughter's anxiety, my anxiety of, oh, who else has touched that, or what's going on? I feel like we're sanitizing before, sanitizing after. And it goes back to, you need to do what's comfortable for you, but also recognizing that our kids pick up on our anxiety. So if we don't want them to feel anxious in those situations, set up situations or cohorts or pods that you feel more comfortable in, because I think that then they'll feel more comfortable as well.
Exactly. I was going to bring up that exact same idea that Kendra was talking about. With anxiety, kids look to their parents to get messages about whether their anxiety makes sense. I know I was just talking about validation. And I think in situations when kids are feeling really high anxiety, oftentimes they'll socially reference, which just means they'll look back at parents' faces to make sure, am I doing the right thing or not? And when kids are feeling that heightened anxiety and you're moving towards that goal of, okay, I want them to socialize, knowing that they're looking to you for an idea, a temperature gauge of whether this is okay or not, and kind of fully, wholeheartedly kind of saying, yeah, you're doing a great job, smiling and like feeling comfortable and modeling for them feeling comfortable. And if time goes by and it's still not feeling comfortable, and you're noticing differences between your kids and other kids who've gone through the same thing, and it feels like maybe there's a lag, you can always ask about that. I think part of what makes the pandemic so challenging is that it's unprecedented. We've heard that a million times. And the reality is, we're not going to know the effects of this on kids. And kids are super resilient. And there's a whole cohort of kids who are going through this right now. So I don't think that the pandemic will represent a critical period for kids where they're not going to get those skills because they missed the window. And I think kind of moving slowly back in their direction and kind of careful watching and waiting is the way to tackle
that. To think about the socialization question, follow up on that is that this parent is saying that one of their concerns is socialization. Both their boys are uncomfortable and uninterested in social situations, and they're 16 now. And this parent says that's when I really started to make friends and develop socially, and I fear they've missed that opportunity. So it's similar to the question that was just asked, but for teens.
I think that one is a little tougher. It always depends on your child's interest. You're with a 16-year-old, even in a pandemic, most kids are wanting to individualize more, and they're wanting to find their own kind of tried more. And I think with the pandemic, we've been so enmeshed with our family that can be part of why you don't see more of those social opportunities. So the more that we can get kids either back at school or online in clubs and really being able to connect with other kids with similar interests, I think that then it allows them that comfort again. It's really hard. I feel like so often we throw kids in and be like, oh, well, you like this, okay, go be friends. And the kids are like, I don't know that person, I don't know what's going on. And then other kids who are really overt are like, sure, no problem. The other part is, driver's license or dances, getting jobs, all of those things that I think used to be kind of part of that rite of passage looks very different now and is very different right now, because we don't want our kids exposed in some of those situations, or we want them to not be at risk during a pandemic. So I would really try and encourage to focus on their interests and see if there are things that we've talked about online cooking clubs, different things like that. And again, I think as things open, there'll be a few more opportunities for that. But there are things like that that kids can sign up for and do. And sometimes that's how they connect with other people. But it's a lot harder. I mean, as adults, I think we find it hard to be on Zoom, or when you go in breakout rooms, like, okay, now, have a discussion about this. And sometimes you're like, all right, nobody's talking. So modeling it can be great, and finding those opportunities when they're available for their interests, I think, is really helpful.
Thank you. Here's a question. So it says parenting doesn't feel like it should be a two-person job. Maybe it's more than two people. Maybe that's what the person's trying to say. But how does one reconcile parenting style differences with their spouse or their partner? What advice do you have there?
I think in managing conflict, this also coming straight out of dialectical behavior therapy, but in managing a difference of opinion, difference of parenting styles, I think open communication about what the difference is, non-judgmental language, is always the first step. So kind of stating like the elephant in the room of like, what is the difference? I'm noticing I'm doing this and you're doing this, non-judgmentally, so no positive or negative valence to either. I'm wondering if we can have a conversation about it. And then from that conversation, validation is going to be important. So here, what that means is kind of honoring the kernel of truth in each other's perspective. So really trying to see where the other person is coming from, honoring that kernel of truth, even if they're like way off and it's hard to really find the kernel of truth. There's always some kernel of truth in what they're saying. And then not necessarily meeting halfway or having a compromise that feels even, but reaching what we refer to as a middle path, which honors both perspectives. Knowing that you are two different people who likely, if this difference exists, will not kind of align completely on this strategy, but having an open dialogue in non-judgmental language, I think, can be a really important first step.
I also know that in my house, we have different work schedules. And so there's times when I have in my mind what I think a consequence should be. So if our routine isn't going well in the morning and I say, okay, you don't get electronics in the afternoon, but I'm not there to enforce that, there's also an understanding I have with my husband that it's like, if you're there, you're in charge. And it's not, it sometimes feels like, oh, are you undermining me because I didn't think they should have that? But I'm punishing him sometimes by taking something away. And he's like, but I'm alone with her and I have to do something else. And I need that time where she might be able to be on her iPad or do something else. And if you take that away, it's actually punishing me. So I think having those discussion about the rules ahead of time, also having house rules that you agree upon, and recognizing that the spouses or the parents have to be on the same page in some areas. You don't have to be, robots and do everything the same, but on certain areas, it helps when you're united, because otherwise your kids are going to find that area to split. And it's going to be much more difficult when you do have things come up. I think divorce is another one. When you have two households, sometimes it's my house, my rules, and then a kid goes to another house and it's different house, different rules. And that can be really hard on the kids. So recognizing that again, even if you aren't, maybe amiable with your ex, recognizing that there's common ground in there and that it's in the best interest of the kid to have some consistency and predictability.
Gosh, there's some other good questions here, and we only have a few more minutes. Um, so, so let's do two more questions. One is there's a fine line between quality time together and too much time together. And so, wondering, like, maybe that question is kind of getting to boundaries, and how can you set boundaries when you're all living in the same space? Is it reasonable to set boundaries, and what might that look like? So think about that, and then we'll follow up with our last question, which is, if there were one thing that you want our attendees to really walk away with tonight, what would that be? So let's talk about that quality time together versus too much time together.
I think you can definitely set boundaries. And I know that a number of parents in our audience have kids with attentional challenges, ADHD, and with that comes impulsivity. And I think you all have experienced this with working in one room and having kids in the other room, where sometimes they're going to be able to understand that the door is closed and that means a parent is working. And sometimes they will bust in there, even though the door is closed, because they're not able to continue with that response. And so I think holding both, like, I'm going to set this boundary and I'm going to know that 100% of the time, I'm not going to get my alone time when I'm trying to do it.
Let me first say, so you can see that there are some resources. We have a couple slides with resources that are articles and some other websites and other resources that might be helpful to you as you think about this topic. So unless you had some other comments, Kendra, on that last topic, we can switch to our last question, which is, go ahead.
Before you go to the last one, I saw a comment in chat, and I just want to validate that there are times that it feels like you're alone and it's very isolating, and you don't have the bandwidth to model anymore, or you need to, take care of work or whatever it is that's going on. And so it's hard to be there for your kids. But recognize your own needs. And when you're feeling at risk, if you don't have extended family, if you don't have childcare, because I really want to make sure that people are taking care of their own mental health too. And so there are crisis lines. We didn't put them on here. They are on our website. And so recognizing that there are times that as a parent, you just feel like you can't do it anymore, and really recognize that there are resources out there for you. There's another number that I don't know if we have it on our website, 211, and I believe it's the United Way, but it's a county resource list, and you can call and say, I need support for finding help for my aging parent, or I need support in finding respite care, or I need support in finding this, and they'll provide you with other resources as well. So if you can, I also talk about like reaching out to the people who do these podcasts and webinars. If there's a question that comes up of resources, we have a great team, and often we'll just send an email and say like, hey, we've got a parent that's looking for a summer camp for a kid that has special needs, or we're looking for this, or are there any things that you hear of? And right now, some of those resources are fewer and further between, but please know that we're here as a resource for you too, not just as an agency, but individually. And we're happy to respond to questions, or at least give you names and numbers of other people that you can contact.
Thank you. That's very gracious. Thank you, Kendra. So Kendra and Anna, as we wrap it up, what's one thing? You've said so many great things and shared so many great ideas and thoughts, insights from your own expertise. What's one thing that you hope parents would walk away with as a result of listening in?
I hope that parents will make space for self-validation, which is really just that idea of noticing how you're feeling and recognizing that given everything that's going on with the pandemic, kind of lingering for a year for the long haul, with all of the issues that are going on with sort of systemic oppression and generally what's kind of going on within your household, outside of it, all of those different layers of systems, and recognizing that it makes sense to feel overwhelmed and burned out, and giving yourself that same compassion that you would offer to someone else who is telling you of a similar struggle.
And I'd second that, the self-compassion and recognizing that there is no shame in asking for help, that we're all in this together, and that there is help out there. And, you know, at least talking with other people, you recognize that a lot of people are struggling, and that, you know, there's good days and bad days, and knowing you're not alone and having other people to talk to can really help with that.
Thank you so much, Kendra and Anna, and thank you to all of our attendees for investing your time with us. Please visit our website, chconline.org. There are lots of resources there, and you can, if you visit the clinical services section, you'll find out more about DBT. You'll see you know, you can connect with one of our clinical services coordinators who can help you with, you know, next steps. You could access a free parent consultation. So there are lots of resources there for you. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. And again, thank you to our experts, Kendra and Anna.